There are moments when the universe holds its breath, not because of war or prophecy or even death, but because something impossible is about to occur. 3 such moments, separated by dimensions and realities, aligned in silence, and in that silence destiny began to tear. In a world where demons devoured humanity beneath moonlight, Nezuko Kamado stood between a family and annihilation. Her pink eyes burned with something beyond hunger, beyond the curse that twisted her body into monstrous form. The demon before her was massive, ancient, drenched in the blood of innocence. It laughed at her hesitation, mistaking mercy for weakness. But Nezuko had learned something no demon should know. That restraint was not surrender. That choosing not to kill, when every fiber screamed for violence, was the hardest battle of all. Her flames ignited crimson and pure, a fire that should not exist in demonic hands. The ancient demon's laughter died in its throat as her kick connected, as her flames consumed corruption without burning innocence. In that moment, as she saved lives she once would have taken, something vast and invisible noticed. The air around her began to hum with potential, with a frequency that did not belong to her world. Across the gulf of space and dimension, Carol Danvers hovered in the void between galaxies. The Kree armada stretched before her like a metal plague, their world-killer dreadnought charging weapons meant to glass entire civilizations. She had seen this pattern too many times. Tyrants who believed overwhelming force erased accountability. Her body blazed with cosmic energy drawn from the heart of a collapsing star, power that rewrote physics wherever she flew. She was not angry. Anger was small, human, limited. What she felt was colder and more absolute, the certainty that some lines could not be crossed. Not while she still breathed. The photon blasts erupted from her fists in golden torrents, each strike carrying enough energy to vaporize capital ships. But as she tore through the armada's heart, as she became a star of retribution incarnate, reality around her began to fracture. Space itself rippled, responding to power it had never been designed to contain. Carol noticed but did not stop. Whatever was happening, those civilians below would not die today. On a forgotten moon in a galaxy far, far away, Obi-Wan Kenobi sat in meditation at the edge of a force nexus. The living force whispered through ancient stones, through air that had known neither Jedi nor Sith for millennia. He had come here seeking clarity, hoping the Force might show him how to heal a galaxy drowning in its own darkness. The Empire's shadow grew longer each day. The Jedi were myths now, hunted ghosts clinging to hope that felt more like delusion with each passing season. And yet he remained, because surrender was not the Jedi way. Even when the Jedi way seemed destined for extinction, the Force surged suddenly, violently, like a scream across dimensions. Obi-Wan's eyes snapped open. He felt it too, impossibilities tearing at the fabric of reality itself. Powers that should not exist. Lives burning with intensities the Force had never known. One blazed with compassion that transcended flesh and hunger. Another radiated energy that dwarfed stars. Both were falling toward his galaxy like meteors aimed at destiny. He stood, hand instinctively reaching for his lightsaber, knowing with terrible certainty that nothing would ever be the same. The convergence began in a place between places, a forgotten wound in reality, where 3 universes had once touched during the galaxy's youth. The Force remembered even if the Jedi had forgotten. It recognized potential when it saw it, recognized patterns of light that defied darkness not through destruction but through something older. Something the Sith had never understood and the Jedi had only glimpsed. Nezuko's protective fire, Carol's cosmic defiance, Obi-Wan's disciplined hope, they resonated on frequencies that reality could not ignore. The fabric of existence bent, stretched, and finally tore. Nezuko felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. The demon she fought, the family behind her, the blood-soaked forest, all of it dissolved into brilliant void. She reached out, instinct demanding she protect something, anything. But there was only light and the sensation of falling through colors that had no names. Her flames flared in panic, then steadied as something deep within her whispered, "Trust this." Carol's cosmic awareness screamed warnings as the space around her collapsed inward. She threw up barriers of pure energy, trying to stabilize whatever phenomenon had seized her, but this was beyond physics, beyond quantum mechanics, beyond anything her enhanced mind could calculate. For the first time in years, Captain Marvel felt genuinely powerless. Not weak, she blazed with enough energy to crack moons but unable to control her trajectory through this impossible tunnel. She stopped fighting and simply braced herself for impact. Obi-Wan did not resist. The Force pulled him forward with a gentleness that belied its power, guiding rather than dragging. He opened himself to its will, trusting in the current, even as his rational mind catalogued 1,000 reasons for terror. Through the blinding corridor he sensed them, the two other lights being drawn to the same destination. One burned with ferocity barely contained by love. The other shone with conviction forged in sacrifice. He reached out through the Force, not to stop them but to acknowledge them. "We are not enemies," his presence whispered into the void. "Whatever comes next, we face it as something more than strangers." The three lights spiraled toward convergence, each carrying with them powers, philosophies, and stories their destination galaxy could never have predicted. And as they fell toward that galaxy far, far away, the Force itself trembled, caught between fear and fascination at what these three souls might become when destiny finally stopped falling and started walking. The last thing each of them felt before impact was not pain but recognition. The sense that somehow, impossibly, this was always meant to happen. The corridor between realities was not empty. It seethed with the living force in concentrations that would have driven lesser minds to madness, currents of past and future, life and death, light and darkness flowing in patterns no mortal was meant to perceive. Obi-Wan had touched the Force's depths before, but never like this. Here it was raw, unfiltered, a cosmic ocean without shore or surface. He stabilized himself through years of training, centering his consciousness in the present moment even as timelines crashed around him like waves. The Force recognized him, welcomed him as one of its own. His presence created calm in the chaos, a small island of clarity in the dimensional storm. Captain Marvel experienced something entirely different. The Force reached for her with curious tendrils of energy, attempting to categorize her, to understand how she fit into its binary of light and dark. It recoiled almost immediately. Carol's power did not draw from the Force, it existed parallel to it, born from cosmic energies that predated galaxies. Where the Force was balance seeking expression, her power was physics bent through will and sacrifice. The two energies did not harmonize so much as acknowledge mutual sovereignty. The Force could not touch her, could not read her, could not predict her. For something that existed as connection between all living things, encountering a being utterly outside its influence was profoundly unsettling. Carol felt the Force's confusion like static against her skin. She did not understand what she was feeling, but her instincts honed through 100 battles across as many worlds told her to remain alert. Whatever awaited her in this new galaxy operated by rules she did not yet know. Nezuko's passage through the corridor was the most violent. The Force surrounded her in waves of attraction and revulsion, unable to decide what she was. It sensed the demonic corruption that had transformed her body, felt the hunger that gnawed eternally at her mind. By every Jedi teaching, by every Sith doctrine, she should have been purely dark side, a creature of appetite and violence, a warning of what happened when beings surrendered to their basest nature. But the Force also felt her heart uncorrupted, defiant, blazing with protective instinct that transcended logic. She was a demon who chose mercy, a monster who fought other monsters to save humans she could never again become. Her flames burned with both destruction and compassion, dark and light woven so tightly they became something the Force had no name for. Ancient Force spirits stirred in the deepest currents, disturbed by her presence. The daughter and the son, those mythic embodiments of light and dark, would have recognized her as paradox. The father who held balance might have smiled. Obi-Wan felt Nezuko's presence before he could perceive her form. The dissonance rippled through the Force like a stone thrown into still water. His first instinct was caution. Darkness always wore seductive masks, always promised power while delivering only chains. But as he opened himself more fully to her presence, he found only confusion. Yes, there was darkness, but it was surface level, a shell rather than a core. Beneath it burned something achingly pure, the desperate desire to protect, to preserve life even at cost to herself. He had known Jedi who were less luminous in their conviction. The contrast fascinated and troubled him. Could darkness be a tool without becoming a corruption? The Jedi taught otherwise, but Nezuko's existence suggested the question itself might be flawed. Carol's awareness swept across both presences. The calm one Obi-Wan radiated discipline and sorrow in equal measure, a warrior who had seen too much but refused to stop caring. The turbulent one Nezuko pulsed with barely restrained ferocity, but ferocity aimed outward, at threats rather than victims. Carol had fought alongside gods and monsters. She recognized allies when she found them, regardless of how they looked or what power they wielded. These two, whatever they were, did not feel like enemies. That would have to be enough until she learned more. The Force itself began to adapt. It was a living thing in ways the three travelers could not fully comprehend, capable of learning, of incorporating new patterns into its eternal dance. Obi-Wan's presence, it already understood a Jedi was simply a Jedi, no matter what universe spawned him. Carol's cosmic energy it accepted as foreign but not hostile, an element to orbit around rather than absorb. But Nezuko posed a philosophical crisis. If she could be both demon and protector, both darkness and light without succumbing to corruption, what did that mean for the absolute truths the Force had whispered to prophets for millennia? What did it mean for the Chosen One prophecy, for the eternal war between Jedi and Sith? Deep in the corridor's heart, something ancient and vast considered the implications. The Force had guided this galaxy through cycles of war for generations uncounted, always working toward balance, always steering events toward the confrontation between light and dark that would finally tip the scales. But these three arrivals represented variables outside that equation. Powers the Force had not accounted for, philosophies it had not predicted. For the first time in epochs, the future became genuinely uncertain. Obi-Wan felt the moment of decision ripple through the dimensional storm. The Force was not rejecting them, it was choosing to incorporate them, to see what new patterns might emerge when such impossible elements entered the galactic stage. He felt gratitude mixed with trepidation. They were being given chance, but no guarantees. Whatever welcome awaited them in this galaxy would be complicated at best, hostile at worst. The three lights began to separate, pulled toward different entry points in the galaxy that awaited them. Carol resisted briefly, instinct demanding she stay with the others, but the current was irresistible. Nezuko let herself be carried without understanding, trusting in the same stubborn hope that had kept her human despite 3 years of demonic hunger. Obi-Wan surrendered to the Force's guidance, recognizing patterns of destiny too vast to fight. As the dimensional corridor began to collapse behind them, reality reasserted itself with violence. The three travelers were hurled from the space between worlds into the galaxy far, far away, separated, disoriented, but alive. The Force settled back into its familiar rhythms, already incorporating their presences into its infinite tapestry. It did not yet know what role they would play in the conflicts to come, but it was eager to find out. Obi-Wan materialized 3 meters above a Duracrete street in the slums of Ord Mantell. The Force cushioned his landing, turning what should have been a bone-breaking impact into merely an undignified stumble. He stood slowly, taking in his surroundings with the careful attention of a man who had survived countless battlefields by noticing details others missed. The architecture was familiar, poverty looked the same in any galaxy, apparently, but the technology screened advancement beyond anything his universe had produced. Speeders hummed overhead on repulsor fields. Holographic advertisements flickered in languages his mind somehow understood, the Force translating intent if not exact words. The Force was stronger here, more pervasive than anywhere he had felt outside Jedi temples. It saturated the air like humidity, connecting every living thing in patterns that made his trained senses ache with information overload. A squad of stormtroopers rounded the corner, their white armor pristine against the slum's decay. They moved with mechanical efficiency, kicking down doors, dragging civilians into the street. Obi-Wan's hand went to his belt, fingers finding the familiar weight of his lightsaber. A memory surfaced unbidden. Anakin, young and eager, asking why the Jedi did not simply impose peace by force. Because peace imposed is just slow-motion tyranny, Obi-Wan had answered. Real peace must be chosen. He watched the stormtroopers' separate families, stun an elderly man who moved too slowly, and made his choice. He had been given a second chance at life. He would not waste it standing by while evil worked unopposed. The blue blade ignited with a snap hiss that cut through the urban noise like a bell. The stormtroopers spun, blasters rising, but Obi-Wan was already moving. Form the Third had always been about efficiency over flash, minimal movement, maximum effect, making your opponent's aggression defeat itself. The blaster bolts curved back toward their sources, Obi-Wan's blade positioning them with surgical precision. Armor sparked and cracked. Bodies dropped. In 14 seconds the squad was incapacitated, and Obi-Wan stood among them breathing steadily, his blade humming its ready song. The civilians stared at him with expressions caught between terror and wonder. He deactivated the saber and spoke in a voice meant to calm. "Go. Quickly. Find somewhere safe." They ran without argument. Obi-Wan melted into the shadows, already moving, already planning. This galaxy was at war. He had arrived in the middle of an occupation. There were Jedi traditions to uphold, even if this galaxy's Jedi had never heard of him. 3 systems away, Captain Marvel emerged from hyperspace unintentionally, her body's cosmic energies translating the dimensional transition into something resembling a starfighter jump. She hung in the void, taking stock. A planet below green and blue, inhabited. Between her and it, a blockade of star destroyers that made her jaw tighten with recognition. She had seen too many tyrants who believed star-spanning armadas granted them permission to break the innocent. The largest destroyer's weapons swiveled toward her, targeting systems locking onto her energy signature. Carol smiled without humor. They thought she was a fighter craft. They were about to learn otherwise. The first photon blast she threw casually, almost experimentally, testing the shields. It punched through the deflector array like it was paper, coring through 7 decks before venting atmosphere into space. Interesting. Carol accelerated, her body becoming a missile guided by will and powered by energies stolen from the Tesseract years ago. She streaked through the destroyer's superstructure, entering through the bridge viewport and exiting through the engine core. The ship began breaking apart before her contrail had faded. Alarms screamed across the Imperial fleet. Turbolaser batteries opened fire in coordinated patterns that would have obliterated any starfighter squadron. Carol wove between the beams, absorbing those that connected, converting their energy into her own reserves. She was not even breathing hard. The second destroyer died when she simply flew through its reactor at relativistic speed. The third, she crushed the bridge tower with a kinetic strike that rang like a gong across the void. By the fourth, the remaining ships were breaking formation, attempting to scatter. Carol let them run. She was not here for slaughter, she was here to send a message. Oppression had costs. And some of those costs wore human faces and hit back. She descended toward the planet, ignoring the calm chatter flooding every frequency. Broadcasts demanding identification, threatening retaliation, begging for mercy. Below, in makeshift rebel bases, insurgents stared at their scanners and wondered if prophecy had taken physical form. On the industrial nightmare of Geonosis, Nezuko fell from a rift in reality and landed in the middle of a factory complex. Sparks flew from assembly lines that stretched beyond sight, each one churning out weapons, armor, components for an endless war machine. The heat was oppressive, the air thick with chemicals that would have choked a normal human. Nezuko barely noticed. Her demon physiology adapted instantly, filtering toxins, regulating temperature. What caught her attention were the workers gaunt, exhausted, moving with the mechanical numbness of those who had forgotten hope. Children among them, small hands assembling circuits meant to kill. An overseer droid approached, its vocabulator barking commands in machine-efficient tones. Nezuko tilted her head, pink eyes focusing on the droid with predatory intensity. She did not understand the words, but intent translated across language. The droid was threatening her, demanding compliance. Her response was instinctive. The kick that destroyed the droid would have pulverized stone. Metal shrieked and collapsed. The factory floor fell silent. Workers stared. Nezuko looked at them, then at the assembly lines, then back at the workers. She had no words to explain herself, no way to communicate across species and language barriers, but she could show them. She walked to the nearest production line and simply tore the machinery apart, demonic strength reducing industrial-grade equipment to scrap. Alarms wailed. Security droids converged from deeper in the complex. Nezuko's flames ignited, crimson and white, burning with heat that made the factory's forges look like candles. The battle was brief and brutal. Nezuko did not kill, she disabled, dismantled, destroyed only the machines. When the droids tried to use workers as shields, her speed became terrifying, positioning herself between metal and flesh faster than photoreceptors could track. When reinforcements arrived, they found a demon standing over a field of wrecked machinery, surrounded by workers who had stopped running and started watching with something that looked dangerously like hope. Nezuko gestured toward the exit, the meaning clear even without words. Leave, run, be free. Some did, others hesitated, unable to believe, unable to process the idea that someone had fought for them without demanding payment or loyalty. Nezuko did not wait for gratitude. She moved deeper into the complex, following the sound of Krinia Child's voice, lost in the mechanical thunder. Behind her, the workers began to whisper in a dozen languages, sharing a story that would spread like fire. A demon with a human heart had come, and nothing would be the same. In 3 corners of the galaxy, 3 arrivals had announced themselves. The Empire's intelligence networks began compiling reports, each one more alarming than the last. The rebellion's scattered cells whispered of signs and wonders. And in the Force, currents shifted as destiny rerouted around obstacles it had never anticipated. The galaxy far, far away had seen heroes before, but it had never seen these 3, and it was not ready for what that difference meant. Obi-Wan found the Jedi survivors 3 weeks after his arrival. They hid on Jabium in tunnels beneath a perpetual rainstorm, 15 souls clinging to traditions the galaxy believed extinct. Their leader, a Togruta woman named Ellis, regarded him with suspicion that bordered on hostility. "Your lightsaber technique is flawless," she said, circling him like a predator evaluating prey. "Your connection to the Force is undeniable, but you are not in our records. The Empire has sent infiltrators before." Obi-Wan bore the scrutiny with patience. He understood paranoia was survival instinct in a galaxy that hunted your kind to extinction. He told them his truth, that he came from beyond their reality, that the Force itself had brought him here. They believed him eventually, not because the story was plausible, but because the Force itself confirmed his sincerity. The debates began almost immediately. Obi-Wan described Nezuko carefully, emphasizing her restraint, her protective instincts, the way she fought darkness from within. The Jedi survivors reacted with visceral rejection. "A demon who does not kill is still a demon," argued Ellis. "Darkness cannot coexist with light. The Sith proved that truth in blood." Obi-Wan pressed his case. "What if she represents something beyond the binary we have always accepted? What if compassion can exist even in corrupted forms?" The younger Jedi looked uncertain. The older ones shook their heads. Their doctrine was ancient, refined through millennia of philosophy and war. It did not bend for exceptions, no matter how compelling. When Obi-Wan spoke of Captain Marvel of power that existed entirely outside the Force, the reactions were even more troubled. To the Jedi, the Force was everything. It connected, sustained, explained all existence. The idea of a being who operated beyond its influence was not just strange but existentially threatening. If the Force was not universal, what did that make the Jedi? Practitioners of a local phenomenon rather than cosmic truth. Ellis grew quiet, her montrals pale. "If what you say is true," she whispered, "then everything we believe may be provincial, limited, a single star proclaiming itself the only light in the universe." Obi-Wan saw his own crisis of faith reflected in her eyes. He offered no easy comfort. Uncertainty, he had learned, was the price of wisdom. The Inquisitors came hunting 3 days later, drawn by disturbances in the Force. They expected frightened survivors, easy prey for Sith intimidation. Instead, they found Obi-Wan. The confrontation happened in the rain-slicked tunnels, red blades against blue, darkness testing discipline. Obi-Wan fought with the economy of motion that came from decades of experience. He did not hate his opponents, he pitied them. Fallen Jedi, corrupted by the Emperor's promises, wielding power that consumed them from within. He disarmed 2, incapacitated the 3rd, and let them retreat. Ellis watched from the shadows. "You could have killed them," she said. "They will return." Obi-Wan cleaned his blade. "Perhaps, but I will not become the darkness to fight the darkness. That is the path to exactly what we oppose." On Mustafar, in the Emperor's fortress of obsidian and rage, Darth Sidious contemplated reports with growing fascination. 3 anomalies. 3 disruptions to the careful web he had woven across decades. The female warrior who destroyed Star Destroyers without starfighters, without the Force, without anything his precognition could predict. The Jedi who appeared from nowhere, fighting with techniques no holocron recorded. And most intriguing, the demon girl who slaughtered droids by the hundreds but left organics unharmed. His servants had attempted to turn her, whispering promises of freedom through surrender to darkness. She had responded by burning them, her flames somehow purging dark side corruption without killing the vessels. Impossible. And yet recorded on a dozen security holos. The Emperor dispatched his most skilled Inquisitor, former Jedi who had mastered psychological manipulation alongside lightsaber combat. "Find the demon," he commanded. "Learn what she is. Break her or recruit her. Either outcome serves our purposes. The Inquisitor found Nezuko on Ryloth, defending Twi'lek refugees from a slave raid. He approached carefully, broadcasting calm through the Force, presenting himself as a potential ally. "You fight for those who cannot fight for themselves," he said, his voice modulated to resonate with protective instincts. "The Empire maintains order through strength. Join us, and you could protect entire systems rather than handfuls of individuals." Nezuko regarded him with eyes that held too much experience for their apparent youth. She did not speak, could not speak, her demon transformation having stolen language, but her body language communicated clearly enough. She pointed at the slavers the Inquisitor traveled with, at the cages on their transports, at the terror in the refugees' eyes. Then she pointed at him. The meaning was unambiguous. "You are with them, which makes you my enemy." The Inquisitor's patience evaporated. He ignited his lightsaber, spinning it in an intimidating flourish. "Then you will learn what happens to those who refuse the Empire's mercy." The fight lasted 8 seconds. Nezuko moved with speed that made her a blur, closing the distance before the Inquisitor could bring his blade to bear. Her kick shattered his weapon. Her flames engulfed him, not killing but burning away the dark side corruption that had festered in his spirit for years. He collapsed, screaming, not in pain but in sudden, overwhelming awareness of what he had become. When the flames faded, he lay weeping, feeling the Force clearly for the first time in decades, sensing the weight of every atrocity he had enabled. Nezuko left him there, alive and broken, a message the Emperor would not misunderstand. Captain Marvel's confrontation with the Sith came differently. An Inquisitor fleet cornered her near Bespin, attempting to overwhelm her with concentrated firepower. Carol let them exhaust their ammunition, absorbing enough energy to power a small sun. Then she demonstrated precisely why beings who transcended conventional physics were poor targets for conventional warfare. She dismantled the fleet ship by ship, precision strikes that disabled engines without killing crews. When the flagship's commander demanded to know what she was, Carol's response was broadcast across every Imperial frequency. "I'm someone who doesn't need your Force or your Empire. And I'm here to remind you that power without accountability is just violence waiting for consequences." The reports reached the Emperor within hours. He read them in his meditation chamber, yellow eyes reflecting datapad light. 3 variables, 3 impossibilities. For the first time in years, Darth Sidious felt something he had nearly forgotten. Uncertainty. The future, always so clear in his visions, had become murky. Paths diverged in directions that made no sense. He reached into the Force, seeking clarity, and found only static where these 3 anomalies existed. They were blank spaces in destiny. Unpredictable, unacceptable. He began making plans. If the Force could not touch them, other methods would. The Empire had not conquered a galaxy through mysticism alone. Terror, overwhelming force, and the willingness to sacrifice entire worlds to achieve objectives, these were tools that worked regardless of Force sensitivity. The Emperor smiled without humor. Let these anomalies believe themselves unbeatable. Pride had destroyed greater beings than they, and he had always excelled at finding weaknesses others thought did not exist. The Imperial response began with calculation rather than rage. Grand Admiral Vess assembled his war council aboard the Executor-class Star Dreadnought * Fist of Conviction *, spreading holographic tactical displays across the briefing chamber. 3 targets, 3 methodologies, 3 campaigns designed to neutralize threats that conventional doctrine could not define. "The Jedi anomaly," Vess began, his pointer hovering over Obi-Wan's last known position, "responds to Imperial aggression by protecting civilians. Standard guerrilla pattern. We isolate his support network, threaten population centers, force him into advantageous terrain." The assembled officers nodded. This they understood. Hunt what the prey protects. Captain Marvel posed a different problem entirely. Energy analysis suggests she absorbs and redirects conventional weapons fire, reported the fleet's chief scientist, a nervous man who kept glancing at the data as if hoping it would change. "Recommendations?" Vess's voice carried the edge of a man whose patience for excuses had long expired. The scientist swallowed. "Kinetic bombardment from distance, overwhelming force concentration, accept fleet losses as operational necessity." Vess studied the projection's 60% casualty rates, best-case scenario. Acceptable, if the alternative was allowing a single individual to checkmate entire armadas. Approved, Designate her threat priority apex. All assets in her operational theater are expendable. Nezuko represented the Council's greatest puzzle. She fought with feral intensity but refused to kill. She protected non-combatants with suicidal dedication but annihilated droids without hesitation. Psychological profiles returned contradictory data. She's not Jedi, concluded the intelligence officer. She's not Sith. Force-sensitive assets report her presence as simultaneously dark and light, corrupted and pure. She should not be possible. Vest tapped his datapad thoughtfully. What she is matters less than what she does. She inspires hope. That makes her dangerous regardless of classification. Deploy bioweapons in her operating zones. Force her to choose between hunting our forces and saving plague victims. Discover if her compassion is genuine or just another predator's instinct. The campaigns began simultaneously. Three-pronged assault coordinated to prevent the anomalies from supporting each other. On Ryloth, Star Destroyers moved into high orbit, launching atmospheric bombardment drones programmed to target civilian infrastructure. Obi-Wan felt the attack through the Force seconds before the first warhead struck. He ran through the refugee camp, shouting warnings in languages he did not speak but somehow made understood, the Force amplifying his intent. The first explosion vaporized an aid station. The second collapsed housing structures. Obi-Wan's lightsaber flashed, intercepting missiles mid-flight, detonating them at safe altitude. He could not be everywhere, could not save everyone. A child screamed as Duracrete rained down. Obi-Wan threw himself over the boy, using his body as shield, feeling debris lacerate his back. The pain was distant, unimportant. He had been a general in a war that consumed millions. He knew the calculus of sacrifice, but knowledge did not make it hurt less. The rebellion's scattered cells rallied to him, drawn by his refusal to abandon the helpless. Twi'lek fighters armed with aging blasters, human refugees who had lost everything but anger, even a few former Imperial soldiers who remembered what serving a higher purpose felt like. They formed around Obi-Wan like iron filings around a magnet, and together they began fighting back. Not with darkness never, with darkness but with discipline. Precision, the unwavering belief that protecting life was worth any personal cost. Obi-Wan led them with the same calm he had shown younglings in the Jedi Temple a lifetime ago. Fear is natural, he told them between firefights, binding wounds with Force-accelerated healing. Terror is the mind killer, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. They believed him because he lived it, because he stood in the bombardment's teeth and did not break. Captain Marvel's battle occurred in the void. Between worlds, the Imperial ambush fleet emerged from hyperspace in textbook formation, 30 Star Destroyers arranged in interlocking fire patterns, their combined firepower capable of glassing continents. They opened up simultaneously, 10,000 turbolaser batteries creating a sphere of death meant to vaporize anything at its center. Carol simply flew through it. The energy washed over her like ocean waves, absorbed into her cellular structure, converted into potential she could release at will. She smiled tightly. They still did not understand. She was not a ship that could be damaged. She was a walking violation of thermodynamics, a human singularity that rewrote rules wherever she stood. She went for the flagships first, precision strikes through bridge viewports, exiting through reactor cores, 17-second transits that left capital ships breaking apart in her wake. The Imperial formation collapsed into chaos. Smaller vessels attempted ramming-run suicide tactics born of desperation. Carol caught a frigate mid-collision, her hands punching through the hull, her strength simply stopping 3 million tons of accelerating starship like a god catching a thrown stone. She redirected its momentum, sending it careening into its sister ship, both vessels tumbling away disabled but intact. No crew deaths. That mattered to her, even if it did not matter to them. She was not here to be a monster. She was here to prove that tyranny always, eventually, met something it could not intimidate or destroy. The remaining destroyers attempted retreat. Carol let most escape, but she crippled the flagship's hyperdrive with a photon lance that cored through 7 decks of armor. She flew inside, landed on the bridge in a shower of sparks and explosive decompression, and spoke directly to the admiral in charge. "Tell your emperor," she said, her voice carrying the weight of civilizations she had saved and tyrants she had humbled, "that there are consequences for predation, that someone is watching, and that I'm not going away." She left without waiting for response, punching back into space, leaving behind a crew that would never forget the day a woman flew, and gods became suddenly, terrifyingly real. Nezuko's battle was the cruelest. The bioweapon spread through the settlements she protected, a hemorrhagic fever engineered in Imperial labs, fast-acting, agonizing, lethal within hours. She found the first victims in a medical tent, their bodies failing as immune systems turned against themselves. The medics were helpless, their primitive equipment inadequate against engineered plague. Nezuko's demonic nature made her immune, but that only meant she could watch clearly as those she had saved from blasters died choking on their own blood. She howled, a sound of anguish that carried no words but infinite meaning. This was targeted, deliberate, not war but murder. She tore through the countryside, hunting the Imperial units responsible with relentless fury. When she found the Mia Special Operations Team monitoring the plague spread from a fortified compound, her restraint finally frayed. She did not kill them, but she hurt them. Shattered bones that would heal crooked, burns that would scar permanently, pain that would etch this day into their bodies as permanently as they had etched it into hers. She took the antidote from their supplies, every vial and injector, and ran back to the settlements faster than speeders could follow. The medics stared as she thrust the medical supplies into their hands. Some understood immediately. Others needed translations. All of them wept when they realized what she had done. But it was not enough. The antidote could not save everyone. Dozens died before treatment reached them. Nezuko sat among the graves they dug, her demonic body unable to cry but her posture radiating devastation. She had fought so hard, had been so careful, and evil had found a way to kill through her compassion. A Twi'lek woman, ancient and scarred, sat beside her. She spoke no words Nezuko could understand, but she rested a weathered hand on the demon's shoulder, a gesture that transcended language. You did what you could, child, and that will have to be enough. Across 3 battlefronts, the Empire learned a bitter lesson. These 3 could not be easily killed, but they could be hurt. Could be forced to choose between impossible options, could be worn down through attrition against everything they fought to protect. Grand Admiral Vess studied the casualty reports: 30 Star Destroyers disabled, 3 battalions decimated, 1 Special Operations team permanently traumatized. Anne smiled coldly. Acceptable losses, because now they knew the anomalies had weaknesses, predictable patterns, exploitable psychology. The Emperor, reading the same reports from his throne on Coruscant, reached different conclusions. These 3 were not weakening. They were learning, adapting, becoming more dangerous with each engagement. He had seen this pattern before, in the Clone Wars, in Jedi who refused to surrender even when victory was impossible. Inspiration was contagious, and these 3 inspired in ways Jedi never had because they were not distant mystical monks. They were visceral, immediate, undeniable proof that individuals could challenge empires and survive. He began planning something final, something that would either break them completely or reveal weaknesses even they did not know they possessed. The Emperor had not ruled a galaxy for decades by playing fair. And if 3 lives had to burn to preserve order across 1 trillion souls, he would light that pyre without hesitation or regret. The convergence happened on a planet whose name had been erased from Imperial records, a world so thoroughly bombed that even its designation was classified as strategic information. Obi-Wan arrived first, following Force whispers about a medical convoy under siege. He found burning wreckage, wounded rebels dragging themselves behind barricades, and an Imperial walker advancing with mechanical inevitability. He was raising his lightsaber when the sky tore open with golden light. Captain Marvel descended like a meteor, her fist connecting with the walker's cockpit in an impact that rang across the ruined cityscape. Metal shrieked. The walker toppled. Carol landed, scanning the area with eyes that saw across spectrums humans could not perceive, and froze when she spotted Obi-Wan. They regarded each other across 50 meters of debris-strewn ground, 2 warriors from different realities, sizing each other up with the instant calculus of veteran soldiers. Obi-Wan spoke first. You fight for these people. It was not a question. Carol's posture relaxed fractionally. Someone has to. You? Obi-Wan gestured at the wounded rebels receiving Force-assisted medical aid from his makeshift field hospital. The innocent do not deserve to suffer for the ambitions of tyrants. Carol smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her war-ready features. Yeah! We're going to get along fine." They might have said more, but the sound of running footsteps pulled their attention. Nezuko burst from a side street, carrying 2 children under her arms, and pursued by a squad of Imperial shock troopers. She skidded to a halt when she saw Obi-Wan and Carol, her pink eyes widening. The troopers emerged, weapons raised, and froze when they realized their target had found reinforcements. The fight was brief, and almost comical in its one-sidedness. Carol casually intercepted blaster fire with her palm, the bolts splashing harmlessly against her skin. Obi-Wan's lightsaber weaved a defensive pattern that sent remaining shots ricocheting into rubble. Nezuko set down the children gently, then moved through the troopers like a ghost, disabling weapons, shattering armor, leaving them alive but thoroughly incapacitated in under 5 seconds. She returned to the children, checking them for injuries with surprising gentleness given her ferocity moments before. Obi-Wan felt the dissonance in the Force, her presence simultaneously alien and achingly familiar. He approached carefully. "You protect them," he said, keeping his voice soft. "Even though you could easily destroy." Nezuko tilted her head, studying him. She nodded once. Carol joined them, looking between the Jedi and the demon with growing comprehension. "You two are like me, aren't you? Not from here." Obi-Wan bowed slightly. "Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Knight. I suspect the Force brought us here for reasons beyond coincidence." Carol extended a hand. "Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. And yeah, cosmic forces pulling people across dimensions sounds about right for my life." They both looked at Nezuko expectantly. She pointed at herself, then drew characters in the air with one-clawed finger symbols neither Obi-Wan nor Carol could read, but the intent was clear. Name, identity, personhood beneath the demonic exterior. Obi-Wan spoke her name aloud, pronunciation guided by the Force's translation. "Nezuko." She nodded enthusiastically, pleased to be recognized. They retreated to Obi-Wan's field hospital, a warren of underground chambers that had once been maintenance tunnels. Rebels watched the newcomers with a mix of awe and uncertainty. The Golden Warrior, who shrugged off turbolaser fire, the demon who moved like nightmare-given form but bandaged wounds with careful attention. Obi-Wan brewed something that approximated tea from local herbs, a habit from another life that brought small comfort. They compared stories haltingly, working through the communication barriers. Carol's translator implant handled Obi-Wan's language after a few minutes of calibration. Nezuko communicated through gesture, expression, and occasional demonstrations of her abilities that made rebels duck for cover. What emerged was understanding. All 3 had lost their original worlds in some fashion, Obi-Wan to Sith betrayal, Carol to cosmic transformation that left her untethered from normal humanity, Nezuko to demonic corruption that stole her human form. All 3 had chosen to continue fighting despite those losses. And all 3 had been pulled here by forces beyond their control, dropped into a galaxy-spanning war they had not started but could not ignore. "So what do we do?" Carol asked, her strategic mind already analyzing possibilities. "We are strangers in a foreign galaxy. No support networks, no supply lines, no reinforcements coming." Obi-Wan sipped his tea, memories of war councils from another lifetime informing his response. "We do what we have always done. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. We resist tyranny wherever we find it. And we trust that our presence here serves some larger purpose, even if we cannot yet perceive it." Carol grinned. "Typical mystic. I was thinking more along the lines of find the local resistance, share intel, coordinate strikes against high-value Imperial targets. But your version works too." Nezuko, who had been watching a child play with a small toy in the corner, stood and pointed at the child, then at herself, then at Obi-Wan and Carol. The meaning needed no translation. Protect them, all of them, together. They began planning that night, 3 perspectives merging into something greater than its parts. Carol's tactical brilliance honed through conflicts spanning galaxies. Obi-Wan's strategic wisdom refined through years of war against impossible odds. Nezuko's direct, uncomplicated moral clarity: protect innocence, destroy oppressors, repeat. The rebels listened to their whispered counsels and felt something dangerous rising. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of those clinging to survival, but the robust, defiant hope of those who had seen power that matched empires. Word spread through rebel networks faster than hyperspace transmissions. 3 champions had emerged: a Jedi who fought like the heroes of legend, a warrior woman who broke fleets with her fists, a demon who burned corruption while sparing the innocent. They operated together now, a triad of complementary strengths that made Imperial commanders nervous. The propaganda machines tried to spin it, calling them terrorists, traitors, aberrations. But beings who had lived under occupation knew the difference between oppression and liberation. They began placing their faith, their resources, their lives in service of these three strangers who asked for nothing and gave everything. The trio's first coordinated mission was modest: rescue a prisoner convoy. Obi-Wan handled strategy, Carol provided overwhelming firepower, Nezuko moved through the chaos extracting civilians. They succeeded without a single prisoner casualty, and the freed prisoners spoke of them with reverence usually reserved for prophets. The Empire registered the incident as a minor setback, the rebellion registered it as a turning point, and the Force itself seemed to hum with approval, ancient patterns aligning around this unexpected trinity. Wisdom, power, compassion, the three foundations every just society needed. United now in common cause against a darkness that had held a galaxy captive far too long. The Emperor felt the shift in his meditations. His certainty, so carefully cultivated, developed its first cracks. Three variables had stopped being separate problems and become a unified threat. He reached for his communications array and began issuing orders. If they wanted to unite, he would give them a reason to regret that choice. He would force them into a confrontation so terrible, so absolute, that they would break or burn. And if the galaxy had to bleed to make that happen, then blood was simply another resource to be expended. The change in Imperial strategy was subtle at first. Patrols increased, checkpoints multiplied, curfews tightened until civilian movement became almost impossible without authorization. On 17 different worlds across the Outer Rim, the Empire instituted what they called pacification protocols, a bureaucratic phrase that meant collective punishment for any system where the three anomalies were reported. Entire cities blockaded, food shipments delayed, medical supplies confiscated. It was not warfare as soldiers understood it. It was siege as a form of terror, slow-motion atrocity designed to turn populations against those who would defend them. The message was clear: your champions bring only suffering. Obi-Wan saw through the strategy immediately. He had watched the Separatists employ similar tactics during the Clone Wars, turning liberators into burdens, making mercy a liability. He gathered the rebel leaders in a cavern deep beneath Ryloth's surface, his voice heavy with experience. "They want us to stop," he said. "They believe if they make our protection costly enough, populations will turn on us, or we will retreat to spare them. We must prove them wrong." A young Twi'lek commander, scars from Imperial torture still fresh on her Leku, spoke what others were thinking. "How do we fight an enemy willing to starve millions for our capture? How do we resist without making their suffering worse?" Obi-Wan had no easy answer. The Jedi way preached non-attachment, but he had never been good at that particular teaching. He cared too much, felt too deeply. These people were not abstractions or casualties to be mourned in meditation. They were individuals, each with names and families and futures the Empire was willing to burn. But he also knew that surrendering to terror was not compassionate, was just delayed execution. "We continue," he said finally. "We resist smarter, strike harder, and we trust that our example inspires others to rebellion. The Empire rules through fear. We fight by proving fear can be overcome." The commanders nodded, though doubt lingered in their eyes. Captain Marvel's response to the new tactics was more direct. She began hunting Imperial supply lines, targeting the logistics that sustained occupation. Convoys vanished between hyperspace jumps, their cargo holds emptied of weapons and filled with freed prisoners. Fuel depots exploded with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of Imperial engineering. Shipyards found their construction schedules sabotaged by a woman who flew through factory floors faster than sensors could lock on. Carol was not just fighting, she was demonstrating that the Empire's reach exceeded its grasp, that their infrastructure was vulnerable, that tyranny's strength was illusion maintained through projection of invincibility. Break the illusion, she believed, and the whole edifice would crumble. But the Empire adapted. If they could not stop her directly, they would make her presence meaningless. Grand Admiral Vess instituted a protocol called Scorched Mercy. For every supply convoy Carol destroyed, the Empire would deny food shipments to 3 occupied worlds. For every shipyard she sabotaged, they would execute prisoners of war in retaliation. They published these policies openly, ensuring Carol would know precisely how many died because of her actions. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal. Make the hero complicit in the very atrocities they fight to prevent. Carol read the casualty reports and felt something she had not experienced in years: helplessness. She could shatter planets, but she could not be everywhere, could not prevent every execution, could not save everyone. The rage that built in her was cold and terrible, not the hot anger of immediate confrontation, but the slow-burning fury of someone watching preventable evil and being unable to stop it all. Nezuko's experience was the most visceral. The Empire began using her appearance against her, broadcasting footage of her demonic form across occupied planets. Propaganda reels showed her flames consuming droids, edited to look like she was burning indiscriminately. Voiceovers called her a monster masquerading as protector, a beast that would inevitably turn on those she claimed to save. In settlements where she was unknown, the propaganda worked. Parents pulled children away when she approached. Refugees refused aid she offered. On Tatooine, a crowd threw rocks at her when she tried to intervene in a raid, choosing Imperial oppression over demonic salvation. She fled into the desert, confused and hurt, unable to understand why those she fought for rejected her. She found Obi-Wan in a moisture farmer's shelter, the old Jedi meditating among spare parts and sand-worn equipment. He opened his eyes as she approached, seeing the pain in her posture. He gestured for her to sit. She did, her demonic frame cramming into a space meant for humans, and Obi-Wan felt the Force ripple with her distress. He spoke slowly, hoping tone would convey what words might not. They fear you because the Empire has taught them that different means dangerous. That power in unexpected forms must be evil. It is not truth, Nezuko. It is conditioning. She tilted her head, listening. Obi-Wan continued. I have seen Jedi become monsters while retaining their human appearance. I have seen darkness dress itself in the robes of righteousness. What matters is not what you look like, but what you choose. And you choose mercy. That is rare. That is precious. Nezuko reached out tentatively, her clawed hand stopping inches from his shoulder, asking permission. Obi-Wan nodded. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. In that moment, Jedi and demon shared an understanding that transcended species and reality. They were both trying to be good in a galaxy that punished goodness. Both fighting for those who sometimes could not see them as saviors. Both exhausted by the endless weight of moral choices in a war where righteousness guaranteed nothing but hardship. They sat together in silence, finding comfort in shared burden. The crisis came on Corellia. The Empire designated the entire planet a consequence zone, announcing that if the 3 anomalies were not surrendered within 1 standard week, orbital bombardment would commence. 12 billion inhabitants. 1 week. No negotiation. The rebel leadership panicked. Some argued for evacuation impossible at that scale. Others suggested the trio should turn themselves in equally impossible, as the Empire would simply execute them and continue the bombardment anyway. Carol wanted to station herself in orbit and intercept every bombardment ship personally. Obi-Wan calculated hyperspace routes that might allow partial civilian evacuation. Nezuko simply stared at the planetary hologram, her expression unreadable. It was the Corellian population itself that provided the answer. On the 6th day, protests erupted across every major city. Billions poured into streets despite curfew, despite threat of lethal response, despite everything. They chanted in languages spanning the galaxy, but the message was universal. We will not surrender them. We will not beg tyrants for mercy. If you want to kill us, do it honestly, but do not pretend it is our defenders' fault. The Empire had made a rare miscalculation. They had pushed too hard, threatened too broadly, made the cost of compliance equal to the cost of defiance. And beings facing certain death anyway chose to die with dignity. The orbital bombardment never came, not because the Empire developed mercy, but because the Emperor recognized a public relations catastrophe in the making. Billions dying in coordinated protest would inspire 1,000 new rebellions. He withdrew the ultimatum, claiming technical errors in threat assessment. But everyone knew the truth. 12 billion beings had called the Empire's bluff, and 3 strangers from beyond reality had inspired them to do it. Obi-Wan, Carol, and Nezuko watched the broadcasts from a safe house, seeing their own stunned faces reflected in the holographic displays. They had not saved Corellia through battle or power. They had saved it by making people believe resistance was possible. But the Emperor's rage at this embarrassment was thermonuclear. He would have his reckoning. And when it came, it would be absolute. He began assembling assets for a confrontation that would either destroy the three anomalies or cement their transformation from saviors to martyrs. Either way, their ability to inspire hope would end. He would see to it personally. And if the cost was paid in the blood of those who foolishly defended them, then that blood would serve as lesson to anyone who dared defy his order again. The Emperor chose Jeddah for the final confrontation, a moon sacred to Force believers, its cities built around temples older than the Republic, its people devoted to faith in ways even the Jedi had forgotten. It was symbolic positioning. Destroy those who believed in balance on ground consecrated to that ideal and crush the concept itself. He assembled an armada that dwarfed most sector fleets, 40 Star Destroyers, 3 Superstar Destroyers, and his personal flagship, the Eclipse-class Shadow of Intention *. The message was unmistakable. He was not sending subordinates, he was coming himself, and he expected total annihilation. Obi-Wan felt the disturbance in the Force 3 days before the fleet arrived. It manifested as pressure, as if reality itself were bracing for impact. He stood in Jeddah's central temple, surrounded by guardians of the wills who maintained their devotion despite the Jedi's fall. "He comes here to break us," Obi-Wan said quietly. "Not just to kill, but to make an example so terrible the entire galaxy will remember." The head guardian, an ancient woman whose eyes had witnessed the Clone Wars beginning and end, nodded slowly. "Then we will show him what faith looks like when it refuses to break. Will your companions fight beside us?" Obi-Wan smiled without humor. "Carol cannot resist a fight this righteous, and Nezuko will not abandon innocence. Yes, we will stand together." Captain Marvel arrived from across the sector, drawn by coded rebel transmissions. She assessed the incoming fleet through long-range scans and laughed a sound of disbelief rather than amusement. 40 Star Destroyers. He's actually committing 40 Star Destroyers to kill 3 people. She looked at Obi-Wan. "We could run, deny him his showdown." Obi-Wan shook his head. "If we flee, he bombards the moon into dust for harboring us. Jeddah's population is in the billions. We stay." Carol nodded. She had expected that answer. Would have been disappointed if he had suggested otherwise. "Then we make him regret bringing such a big stick to what he thinks is a small fight." Nezuko was found by rebel scouts in the temple's lower levels, surrounded by children she was teaching a clapping game that transcended language barriers. They tried to explain the danger, the incoming fleet, the certainty of massive casualties. Nezuko listened, her expression growing serious, then stood and gestured for the children to go to their parents. She understood. The Empire was coming. And this time, they were not coming with surgical strikes or psychological warfare. They were coming with extinction. She made her way to the temple's summit where Obi-Wan and Carol waited. The 3 of them stood together, looking up at stars that would soon be eclipsed by Imperial steel. The fleet dropped from hyperspace like a mechanical dawn, so many ships that they blotted out the sun. The Emperor's holographic projection materialized above Jeddah's major cities simultaneously, his withered face and yellow eyes magnified until they dominated the skyline. "Citizens of Jeddah," he began, his voice a rasp that carried the weight of absolute authority. "You harbor enemies of order. Surrender the 3 anomalies within 1 hour, or this moon will serve as monument to the price of defiance." The timer appeared beside his face, counting down. 60 minutes. No negotiation. The hologram vanished. The rebels scrambled to evacuate who they could, but there was no time, no ships, no hope of saving more than a fraction of the population. Panic spread through cities like wildfire. People prayed in streets, held their loved ones, awaited death with whatever grace they could muster. Obi-Wan walked among them, offering what comfort he could, a touch on the shoulder, a quiet blessing. The presence of someone who refused to abandon them, even at the end. Carol positioned herself in orbit, alone against the armada, calculating firing solutions that might disable command ships before they could give bombardment orders. Nezuko stood at the temple's base, flames already ignited, ready to burn through whatever came. The hour expired. The Emperor gave the order personally. "Fire!" Carol moved first, accelerating to relativistic speed, targeting the Eclipse's bridge. Turbolace of fire converged on her position from 100 ships, simultaneously coordinated fire control that turned space itself into a death field. She absorbed what she could, dodged what she could not, and punched through the Eclipse's forward shields like they were paper. Her fist impacted the reinforced viewport at speeds that made physics scream. The transparestial held barely, and Carol rebounded, spinning through the void, redirecting her momentum into the nearest superstar destroyer. She cored through its superstructure in 3 seconds, exiting through the engines, leaving the ship dead in space. On the ground, atmospheric fighters screamed down through Jedda's thin atmosphere. Nezuko met them with leaps that defied gravity, kicking through their underbellies, her flames igniting fuel lines, sending them spinning out of control. She rode one down intentionally, guiding its crash toward empty desert rather than inhabited structures, leaping clear at the last moment. Ground forces deployed at walkers, thousands of stormtroopers in mechanized waves. Nezuko became a blur among them, disabling rather than killing when possible, but not hesitating when protection demanded lethality. Her flames created walls between civilians and soldiers, barriers of heat that parted for refugees, and burned those who meant harm. Obi-Wan stood in the temple's central chamber, his lightsaber ignited, waiting. The Inquisitors came for him personally, 12 of the Emperor's finest, trained to hunt Jedi, skilled in corrupted force techniques. They attacked in coordinated patterns, spinning blades meant to overwhelm through chaos and aggression. Obi-Wan met them with Sorsu-perfected defense so complete it became offense, economy of motion so refined that he seemed barely to move while his opponents exhausted themselves. He disarmed 3 in the opening exchange, disabled 2 more with force pushes that slammed them into ancient pillars. The remaining Inquisitors hesitated, recognizing a master who transcended their training. The battle raged for hours. Carol systematically dismantled the Imperial fleet, one ship at a time, her body absorbing staggering amounts of firepower and converting it into devastating counterattacks. Nezuko protected the evacuation corridors, ensuring that every transport that lifted off did so without Imperial interference. Obi-Wan held the temple, preventing enemy forces from desecrating the sacred ground or using it as a base to target civilians. The 3 of them, separated across battlefield and orbit, fought with perfect unconscious coordination, wisdom creating opportunities, compassion protecting what power enabled, power removing obstacles that wisdom and compassion could not overcome. The Emperor watched from his flagship's command throne, yellow eyes narrowed. They were not breaking, were not surrendering, were not even flagging. If anything, they fought more effectively as the battle progressed, as if resistance itself energized them. He reached a decision born of frustrated rage. If he could not break them individually, he would force them into impossible choices. He ordered his forces to target the evacuation transports, not to destroy them quickly, but to disable them, leaving them drifting in space filled with thousands of helpless civilians. Then he broadcast on all frequencies, "Captain Marvel, you have 1 hour to surrender yourself aboard my flagship, or I begin executing the transport occupants. 100 per minute until you comply." Carol heard the transmission and felt something break inside her, not her will but her patience. She had tried to fight honorably, to disable rather than slaughter, to be the hero these people deserved. The Emperor wanted to play with hostages. She would show him what happened when you pushed a woman who had absorbed the energy of a collapsing star past her capacity for mercy. She stopped pulling her punches. The next Star Destroyer she engaged did not get disabled, it got erased, her photon blasts overloading its reactor so catastrophically that the ship vaporized in a fireball visible from the surface. The next 3 died the same way. Carol became an angel of obliteration, and the Imperial fleet began to genuinely understand fear. On the surface, Nezuko and Obi-Wan felt Carol's shift in approach. They moved to support her decision without hesitation. Nezuko stopped disabling enemy forces and started ensuring they could not return to battle. Obi-Wan's lightsaber work became lethal, his strikes targeting critical points, his force abilities focused on ending threats rather than neutralizing them. The 3 of them, in unspoken accord, had reached the same conclusion. There was a difference between murder and refusing to let evil continue unopposed. They had tried restraint. The Empire had answered with hostage execution. Very well. The gloves came off. The Emperor felt it through the Force, the moment when 3 lights stopped shining gently and became stars going nova. He had pushed them beyond mercy into something colder and more terrible, justice without compromise. He stood from his throne, reaching for his personal lightsaber for the first time in years. If they wanted war absolute, he would give them an opponent who had drowned galaxies in blood and called it order. The shadow of intention descended through Jedda's atmosphere, a mechanical mountain falling toward the temple where Obi-Wan stood. And the final confrontation, the clash that would determine not just this battle but the philosophical foundation of the entire galaxy's future, began. The Emperor descended into Jedha's temple like darkness given form, his presence in the Force a void that consumed light. Obi-Wan stood in the central chamber, lightsaber raised, knowing with perfect clarity that this was a fight he could not win. The difference in raw power was too vast, but winning, he reminded himself, had never been the point. Surviving was not the point. The point was standing anyway, bearing witness to the idea that tyranny did not get final say, that even doomed resistance mattered. They fought in silence, crimson blade against blue, Sith lightning against Jedi defense. The Emperor attacked with technique refined over centuries, with power that drew on the pain and death of quadrillions. Obi-Wan defended with every lesson learned across a lifetime of war, with the strength of those he fought for rather than against. He could not match the Emperor's might, but he could endure, could make every inch the Emperor gained costly, could prove that even the most powerful being in the galaxy had to work for his victories. Above the temple, Captain Marvel engaged the Eclipse-class Star Destroyer in single combat that rewrote military doctrine. She tore through its hull like a knife through fabric, seeking the Emperor's presence, finding only automated systems and sacrificial commanders. The ship itself was a distraction. She realized one massive piece on a board meant to keep her occupied while something worse unfolded below. She made a choice, abandoning the half-destroyed dreadnought and diving through atmosphere toward the temple. If this was endgame, she would face it alongside the allies who had become something more precious than she had expected, friends. Nezuko fought through the temple's lower levels, battling inquisitors and elite stormtroopers who had orders to collapse the structure with civilians still sheltering inside. She moved with desperate speed, her flames creating barriers, her strength holding up collapsing pillars. She could not be everywhere, could not save everyone, but she saved who she could. And when the temple began to crumble anyway, when the weight of Imperial bombardment finally exceeded Stone's capacity to endure, she did something reckless and beautiful. She became the foundation. Her body, transformed through demonic strength, held up tons of falling rock while civilians ran beneath her toward safety. The pain was immense. The strain threatened to crush her. But she had been crushed before by the curse that made her a demon, by the hunger that tried to steal her humanity. She knew how to endure what should break her. Carol reached the central chamber as Obi-Wan fell, lightning-scarred and exhausted. The Emperor turned to her with a smile of anticipation. Another anomaly, another variable to eliminate. Carol's response was wordless, a photon blast at point-blank range that would have vaporized lesser beings. The Emperor caught it in a force shield, redirected it into the temple walls. They collided, cosmic power against dark side mastery, Carol's fists against force lightning, two philosophies of dominance crashing like tectonic plates. The chamber could not contain their battle. Walls exploded outward, the floor cracked. And still neither gave ground. Obi-Wan, bleeding and broken, reached out through the Force with the last of his strength. Not to attack, he was beyond that, but to connect. To Nezuko holding up the temple. To Carol fighting an unchained monster. To the rebels and civilians watching their last hope burning out. He whispered into the Force a truth the Jedi had always known but rarely achieved. You are not alone. None of us are alone. We are all threads in a tapestry vaster than empires. His presence in the Force became a beacon, a rallying point. And across Jeddah, the impossible happened. Civilians picked up fallen blasters. Rebels who had hidden emerged into streets. Even stormtroopers, sickened by orders to execute refugees, turned their weapons on their own commanders. Obi-Wan's sacrifice ignited something the Emperor had not anticipated: collective defiance. The realization that individuals were weak, but solidarity could move worlds. The Emperor felt his grip slipping. Not militarily, his forces still outnumbered the rebels catastrophically, but symbolically, spiritually, in the realm where power was granted rather than taken. 3 outsiders had done in months what rebels had failed to do in years, made hope seem reasonable. He made the calculation instantly. He could win this battle and lose the war, or retreat and preserve mystique. He chose retreat with a politician's instinct for cutting losses. A final blast of force lightning drove Carol back, bought him seconds. He fled to his shuttle, broadcasting a single message as he ascended. This is not mercy. This is delay. I will return, and every being who stood against me today will learn the price. But the Emperor's words rang hollow against the reality on the ground. The Imperial fleet jumped to hyperspace in disarray. Stormtroopers surrendered or fled. The rebels, bloody and exhausted, stood among ruins and realized they had not just survived, they had won. Obi-Wan, carried to a medical transport, smiled at Carol and Nezuko through pain. "We did it, together." Carol nodded, her own exhaustion showing for the first time. Nezuko, still holding up the temple's remains, carefully lowered the stones and emerged from the rubble covered in dust and glory. The galaxy would remember Jedi, would tell stories of the Jedi who would not stop protecting, the warrior woman who fought fleets alone, the demon with a human heart. But the three themselves did not stay for accolades. Obi-Wan returned to the shadows, guiding rebels through wisdom rather than spectacle. Carol departed for other systems, other emergencies, carrying the memory of two allies who understood that power meant nothing without compassion. Nezuko walked into legend, appearing wherever darkness seemed absolute, a reminder that even monsters could choose mercy. They had not destroyed the empire that would take years more struggle, but they had destroyed its aura of invincibility, had proven that individuals could stand against systems and survive. Three lights from beyond reality, refusing to go out, burning bright enough to ignite a galaxy's hope. And in the Force, in the spaces between stars, something ancient and vast smiled. Balance, it whispered, was never about choosing between light and darkness. It was about finding those rare souls who embodied both and somehow remained themselves. The three had passed a test they did not know existed, and the galaxy would be forever changed by their refusal to surrender, to despair, to become the darkness they fought.